Question, what's the best fast practical Audi? Obviously it's the RS6, but there's a problem. People just aren't buying estates. They're buying SUVs, which means if you want a powerful performance car that's practical with 4 rings on the front, well then you're gonna need one of these.
This is the SQ7, a big, fast, practical Audi SUV. And this is the SQ8. It's a big, fast, practical Audi SUV. Both cars use the same engine. Both do 0 to 62 in 4.8 seconds, both do 155 miles an hour, and both offer the same incredible 900 Newton meters of torque. All very similar then, until you look at the price. The SQ7 starts from around £76,000, and the SQ8 will set you back £81,000. So why the difference in price, and which one should you pick?
The truth is, these cars are incredibly similar. They're based on the same platform, but there are a couple of interesting differences. The SQ7, for example, is about 2.5 inches longer, but a bit narrower because it's less sporty, not quite as aggressive as the SQ8. But it is also taller, which means on paper it should be the more practical car. But there are a couple of key differences with their designs. Check this out. The grille on the SQ8, it has this really thick mask. It's quite an aggressive car, this thing. On the SQ7, look at that. The grille's much more narrow, much thinner, much more contemporary, I think. Headlights as well, another key difference. On the SQ7, very narrow, very self-contained with these sequential LED indicator lights. Over on the SQ8, quite similar, but if you notice, it looks like it's self-contained, but the actual headlights are located down here on the lower section. They've actually had to go out and actually re-engineer new lights specific to the SQ8. But I think they could have saved a bit of money and put these on. I prefer these.
But these are minor details, because the biggest difference lies in the shape. The SQ7 has a much more typical SUV silhouette. It's big, monolithic, a bit gangster. But look at the SQ8. It's a coupe, much more sporty. The roof tapers away into a slope to make it look a little bit more sleek. Out of the two, it looks like the SQ8 is going to be the most fun and the SQ7 is going to be the most practical.
And that's a pretty fair assessment, really, because obviously with a shape like this, the SQ8 is going to be a little bit compromised, especially where boot space is concerned. And let's take a look inside. That is what you call a 600-litre boot, which is slightly smaller than the boot you get on the SQ7. With its more traditional SUV shape, in here, Audi provides you with a pretty substantial 800-litre boot. That's about 200 litres more than you get in the SQ8. Another big advantage with the SQ7 is you get the option of 7 seats. So if I remove this parcel shelf, actually there's nowhere to put it in the car itself, so I just have to stash it on the floor. You can see you have 2 individual seats at the rear and they're electronically operated. If I push this button, look at that, they fold up by themselves. And then if I pop around, and if I then drop the second row and clamber unceremoniously into the back, what you'll find is that there's actually a decent amount of space back here. Even for a grown adult, I wouldn't want to spend too much time in the 3rd row, but it's nice to have the option. Up in the 2nd row, you get so much room, it's unbelievable. Loads of leg room, loads of headroom, and the seats move forward and backwards to give you either more space in the boot or more leg room, depending on what you want. Plus, you get your own separate climate controls, 2 USB ports, and a 12-volt power socket. But there's a problem. Look at this. The C-pillar in this car is solid, which means you're driving along, you go to look outside the window, and you've got a face full of C-pillar. Not ideal, slightly claustrophobic. The SQ8 doesn't have that problem. Check this out. You get the same amount of room inside the car. However, you have this little glass panel just in front of the C-pillar, which gives you so much visibility out the side of the car. Much less claustrophobic.
Up front, they're virtually identical. Both use the same dashboard, both have the same amount of practical storage, both have the same incredible twin touchscreen infotainment and climate control, and both use Audi's even more brilliant virtual cockpit, which gives access to all your data, infotainment, maps, and speed in one futuristic display. They're both very clever, but which is the best to drive?
The first thing you notice about the SQ8 is that it's properly quick. This is easily the quickest diesel SUV I've ever driven. It uses the same engine you'll find in the SQ7, so it's a 4-litre twin turbocharged diesel V8 that makes 435 horsepower and 900 Newton meters of torque. Now those numbers mean it will do 0 to 60 in 4.8 seconds, and it will carry on up to a maximum speed of 155 miles an hour. Great for all my Autobahn crew out there. It is massively quick. As soon as the road opens up and you find yourself in front of a straight, put your foot down, you find yourself literally at the end of the road. The way it responds is pretty damn impressive. The twin turbo setup is very cool. One turbo fires quite low down in the RPM range, and another fires slightly later. Plus, you've got an electric compressor that can fire a burst of high pressure air into the turbos in order to help them spin up. The idea is that between the two turbos and the compressor, you never have a moment where the turbos are asleep, so there's no turbo lag. In practice, it works really well. The car always feels ready and eager to respond. Kind of like a sprinter in the blocks, ready to explode. It's just a bit of a shame that it doesn't quite have the drama that you get from some fast SUVs like the Jaguar F-Type SVR or the Range Rover Sport SVR. That violent acceleration is lacking. It's quick, but a little bit of violence wouldn't go amiss. Part of that is because it's lacking in noise. This is, make no mistake, the best sounding diesel V8 I've ever heard, and it sounds fantastic when you're standing outside the car, but inside the cabin, yeah, not quite enough noise.
As for agility, the SQ8 weighs 2.3 tons. It's actually 45 kilograms heavier than the SQ7. That's like carrying a fully grown woman with you everywhere you go, but it's reasonably agile.
That's down to 3 elements: a rear diff, all-wheel steering, and fancy anti-roll bars. The rear diff is pretty straightforward. It helps you get more traction as you exit a corner. The second item, all-wheel steering, turns the rear wheels in the opposite direction to the front wheels by 5 degrees at low speeds in order to reduce the car's turning circle. When you're traveling at higher speeds, the rear wheels turn in the same direction as the front in order to improve stability. Those two things help the car feel a lot more agile than it has any real right to, but it's the third item that's probably most impressive of all: electromechanical active roll stabilization.
Each axle has a small electric motor attached that can, in layman's terms, effectively push one side of the car's body away from the wheel that it's trying to lean towards during a corner. Nothing new here, of course, but Audi uses a more powerful 48-volt system, which provides more precise control of your body roll. It works the other way too, allowing lots of body movement when the car isn't in a corner to allow for a more comfortable ride.
So, performance is clearly the SQ8's superpower. You look at the two cars, and on paper, the SQ8 is going to be the most fun of the two to drive. It's got the engine, it's got the acceleration, it's got the sporty looks. Is it better than the SQ7? Let's find out. So as soon as you jump into the SQ7, you realize straight away, this thing's actually not lacking in any performance. It uses the same twin turbocharged V8 diesel as you get in the SQ8. So it's properly quick. 900 Newton meters, 430 horsepower, 0 to 60 in 4.8, 155 mile an hour top speed, and it really does shift. There's not a lot of diesels out there that can move like this thing moves. But even though the two are very similar, there are subtle nuances that separate the two cars.
On paper, the SQ7 steering is less sporty, less responsive than the SQ8's. The steering ratio in this car is 15.8 as opposed to 14.6. But despite that difference, the SQ7 weighs less, which means it might actually have a small advantage through the corners.
This thing's 45 kilos lighter than the SQ8. And I know that's not a great deal in the grand scheme of things, but psychologically at least, I feel like this is the more agile car.
One thing the SQ7 does have over the SQ8 is better fuel economy. The SQ7 manages 37.1 miles per gallon versus the SQ8's 36.2. Now, a 1 mile per gallon difference isn't massive, but with around 18.5 gallons per tank, an extra 18.5 miles per fill-up stretched over the course of an entire year does add up. This is yet another advantage.
And even though you have those advantages, you don't get any of the disadvantages, you still get the performance that the SQ8 delivers. I think part of the problem though is that the SQ8 isn't actually that fun. It's not a crazy, enjoyable, all-out sports car that delivers driving thrills in the way that you might expect. And the SQ7 behaves in pretty much the same way. That being said, it's a surprisingly capable car. If you do decide to push it and try and have some fun with this car, I think it will impress you in some ways. It's such a big, heavy machine, but when you chuck it into a bend, right, going into a corner right now, it stays so flat through the corners. There's so much grip, so much traction on the exit, and it stays so composed that you can't help but be impressed. If I was going to be overly critical, and it's hard to be critical when a car's this good, I would say that the 8-speed Steptronic automatic gearbox is too good. Now what I mean by that is that it's barely perceptible when it's changing gear. And around town, that's fine. You want a car that is actually quite silky smooth. But when you're trying to enjoy the ride, you want to feel a little bit of involvement from the transmission. You can put the car in manual mode by sliding the gear stick to the left-hand side, and you can use the paddle shifters up behind the steering wheel. But when you do that, you still can't actually tell that the car's changing gear. It almost feels like an electric car. And because of that lack of involvement, you end up not bothering doing that, which is a massive shame, because I think any car that gives you the option to change gears should also do its best to help you enjoy that process of changing gears. And this doesn't do it. So, which of these two cars is best? Well, that kind of depends on you, really. Ask yourself, do you prefer the coupe styling of the SQ8, or do you need the practicality of the SQ7? If you can answer that question, then it's pretty much a no-brainer. Go for the one that works best for you. However, if you're still struggling, let me help you out. This is the important point. The SQ7 can match the SQ8. The SQ8 can't match the SQ7. This car is just as fast, more practical, arguably better looking, cheaper to buy, slightly cheaper to run, and for those reasons, the car that sits at the very top of the Audi SUV food chain is the SQ7. Am I right? Am I wrong? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and come back soon for even more reviews. Peace.